In this case, we're not using it for pitching, we're using it much more as a guide for development and as a way to communicate your game ideas. Now, there is no definitive way to make one, much in the same way there isn't a definitive way to make a game. However, the key purpose of it, at least for you, and whether you use it as a pitching document or as a design document, is to communicate your concept. Your concept can't sit in your head, because some of you seem to think that sometimes. Having the game in your head is great, but the last time I checked, none of your team members are going to be psychic, and they're not going to know the ins and outs of your concept without you telling them. And even if you think you have the entirety of the game in your head, it's very likely that you don't. In the same way that people forget to pick up bread when they go to the supermarket, there are going to be holes in what you think you know. Getting it out on paper and seeing it concrete will help you find where those gaps are and eventually address them. And again, this is Scott Rogers. He worked on I suppose not that well-known series anymore called Maximo for the PlayStation 2. It was sort of a 3D evolution of Ghouls and Goblins from Capcom. Eventually, you will need to read your own GDD. Creating documentation will help you as much as your teammates. If you keep the game in your head, I guarantee there is going to be a moment when you have too much to keep track of and you will get overwhelmed, or even worse, you will forget about your great idea like the gun that shoots fire ants. There are always going to be things that you forget if you keep it up here, get it down on paper, discuss it with people, flesh out, find where the gaps are, and address them. A recurring theme that you'll find throughout this little talk that we have this morning is that this is all about communication. As game designers, not just for your game design documents, your whole role is to communicate to the players how to play the game, and hopefully they will enjoy it. That is essentially your purpose. So, we're going to go through a couple of quick GDD examples. We showed these last year, so we won't go through them in the same amount of detail, like I said. But essentially, these are just ways to write them. And the real thing here is look at the style of writing. For the most part, it is direct, to the point, and clearly communicates what it is trying to do. So the first of these is Race and Chase. This would eventually become Grand Theft Auto, but this is a good example for a couple of reasons. It's just super direct, super clear, easy to understand. Don't know how many have actually played the original Grand Theft Auto, but kind of holds up. So we'll quickly skim through. This is what was outlined on the first 2 pages. For the most part, I've taken out the key points. Some of it is probably unnecessary, but mainly due to how they were pitching it at the time. It was originally for PC, and whoever they were pitching to, most likely their publisher, wanted specifics over how they were going to use the hardware. So, we're going to quickly skim through these. The aim of Race and Chase is to produce, and here's the key part, a fun, addictive, and fast multiplayer car racing and crashing game, which uses a novel graphics method. You don't really need the novel graphics part, but you get a tagline very quickly, communicates the overall concept, and you have a clear idea of what you are getting yourself into. As far as what you should take from this, a tagline is a great thing to have. In the same way that any kind of movie poster has a tagline, can you summarize the experience and the appeal of your game into a single sentence? If you can't, you probably need to refine your concept or figure out a way to get your concept across. Setting, the game will be set in a present day world. Again, you can crunch that down into a sentence. Students have a tendency to really bog down on lore and story because it's a lot of fun to make, but doesn't really contribute to the game design that often. All you need is a general premise to build your game mechanics into. We quickly have an idea of the game structure. There will be many different missions to be played in each city. There will be 3 cities with a different graphic style for each. This is so that players can get to know the routes through a particular city. The routes part isn't that important to the game structure, but it does highlight part of the experience. There is an expectation that players are going to be going through these repeatedly and become familiar with the areas that they're playing. In each game type, it will be possible to progress to different cities only when certain goals have been attained. Again, outlining of the structure. This part's not that important, but it's interesting, I suppose, from a historical perspective. Game will be playable by multiple players across a network or by one player at a standalone machine. Originally, Grand Theft Auto was going to have online capability. Console versions will allow 2 players at one machine. If I recall correctly, that wasn't added in the end. Action. This particular part is useful because it pretty much outlines very quickly what mechanics are available to the player, although it doesn't specify exactly what they are, but it clearly outlines what the gameplay is. Players will be able to drive cars. Cars can be stolen, raced, collided, crashed, have to be navigated about a large map. It will also be possible for players to get out of their car and steal another one, again, in very short sentences, highlights the mechanics. And this will mean controlling a vulnerable pedestrian for a short time. This part is not as useful, but what we get here is it breaks down the different modes of gameplay. So we understand what the mechanics are. You can drive cars, you can steal cars, you'll have to control pedestrians at some time, and there will be open cities that you need to drive around and memorize routes. This section really just highlights the different kind of game modes. So you have races, you have demolition derbies where points are given through damage, you have bank robberies where you'll be driving getaway cars and evading police. And you also have the flip of that where you'll be playing as the police chasing robbers. Again, going back to that tagline, in a simple format, it outlines what the appeal of the game is and what kind of game it is going to be. Fun, addictive, fast multiplayer car racing and crashing game. It wouldn't become multiplayer until, I suppose, San Andreas had some multiplayer. Now, what are the pros of this document if you decide to go and have a look at it? It is direct, it is clear, it is concise. We love concise documents. If you can get to the point quickly and communicate your idea in the less words, the better for the most part. And it's easy to understand, structured well, highlights, breaks down how it's going to go about the game and all what different modes are available. There are good headings for each section that it explains. Headings, very useful. Not all students seem to use them. Now, what are the cons of this document? Its brevity and how direct it is can lead it to being light on details. For example, it says you have to control a pedestrian. It doesn't exactly say how or what this means. It does go into it a little bit more the further on in the document. Keep in mind what we saw was only the first 2 pages. But there are some details that it fails to explain which would help better illustrate the gameplay. It also talks about alarms going off and the police. It doesn't really explain the police AI, the behavior. How do you evade them? Is it a constant chase? Can they be lost? How do they work if you were caught? All these sorts of things will need to be explained at some point. The next example is kind of good, but sort of fake, because it is a recreated document for Silent Hill 2. Why is it kind of fake? Well, this document was never released, but snippets were, and they were in Japanese, so some very dedicated fan went and translated them and tried to create what is basically an approximation of what the document was. This one is useful because it highlights what a lot of students like to do, which is talk about plot, characters, but it goes beyond that because it manages to weave those successfully in with explaining its gameplay. It also talks about experience, which is something I think students have a tendency not to focus on. How do you want the player to feel? What kind of game is this supposed to be? What kind of experience should they be having? Like I said, it is not a 100% legitimate GDD, but it is useful as a learning tool. So let's quickly skim through this. It talks about the general flow of gameplay. It'll be a mix of both fighting monsters and solving puzzles. It doesn't really illustrate the fighting well, but seeing as it's a sequel, to some extent it doesn't have to. Talks somewhat about pace. Here are some of the good structural parts. When it comes to interior exploration, enemies will be dotted around corridors and rooms, but sparsely enough to maintain the feeling of isolation and fear. Again, emphasis on that experience. The game works heavily on the concept that what you don't see makes you increasingly scared. This was from a different period in horror games, much more, I suppose, leisurely in pace, as opposed to something high octane like an Outlast. Again, emphasis on experience. In Silent Hill, you'll walk down a corridor with a sick feeling in your stomach and nothing will happen. The threat doesn't start and it never ends. Some mechanical parts. The 2 main ways of detecting these monsters will be a flashlight for visual detection and a radio that emits static when a monster is nearby. Again, clear and direct writing, easy to understand. Here is a part that we'll talk about a little bit later. The style of puzzles in Silent Hill 2 will definitely reflect the atmosphere and underlying narrative of the game. The audience is promoted to think hard about the solutions, giving the players either the task of collection or the tactic of try every combination. Again, that translation not the best. It also highlights something that I think a lot of students should think about. Essentially, it says game flow, but this is to some extent the core loop. It basically says that the game will be quite linear, and the way it will be structured is players will encounter enemies or enemy sections. If they survive those enemy sections, there will be a bit of a downturn in tempo. They'll focus on puzzle solving. Once they have solved that, they will be rewarded with narrative sections. Essentially, story is the reward here, and ideally the story will be the incentive to keep the players invested. But again, good outlining of it, of what is essentially the core loop. Pros and cons here, again, it's clear there is a focus on mood and flow of gameplay. Mood is very important to something like a horror game and needs to be clearly outlined. It uses other games as a reference. This is something everyone should do. If you know your audience and you know what kind of games that they are already interested in, use those games as a reference to more clearly communicate your ideas. Pros, some core mechanics are explained. For example, the monster detection that we talked about with the radio emitting static. Cons, and this is for everyone, if any of you are considering puzzles, saying you have puzzles as a mechanic is not really an explanation of your mechanic. Puzzles are a broad term for some sort of problem that needs to be solved. You need to outline what kind of activities are they going to be engaging in with puzzles. It can be as simple as players need to explore an area, find a key to unlock a door. That would qualify as a puzzle. If you have puzzles in your games, explain exactly what they are. Another con, there are big long paragraphs, and this also applies to everyone. Break up your paragraphs into the key points so that we can easily move from section to section. That's not just for myself and Billy, that is also for whoever your team members are. Remember, they are using this document as a reference to build the game. If it's difficult to navigate, it's going to slow down development. I always keep this in here just for fun. This is the Don't Do This Metal Gear Solid 2 style document, and in all fairness, some students have done this before. Basically, Hideo Kojima decided to write a script and some philosophy deep dive about genes and inheritance and the sins of your ancestors and that sort of thing. There is an interesting section where they talk about mechanics, but for the most part, it is this big, kind of unruly script that is interesting to read, but probably not that useful to build from. So in a way, I recommend you guys read it, but take everything from it with a grain of salt. So, games. Games are built up of a variety of tasks, and a variety of jobs or roles or skill sets, combining programmers, animators, artists, composers, audio engineers, all kinds of different people into one. And you are somewhat at the top of that ladder as game designers. Meaning, like I have said before, your role is to communicate the ideas both to the audience and to communicate ideas between team members. You have to get your ideas on paper so that they are built in the way that you sort of expected, which comes back to the importance of communication. So, what was the point of this? Right. I kind of already covered the section when we went over the document, but the document is not just for us, the staff, it is for your team. The clearer your writing is, basically it needs to make sense, needs to be understandable from their perspective. We've kind of covered the points here. Here is the reminder that you can get visual. Visuals are good. People understand visuals. They understand diagrams. They understand concepts to an extent. All of these are tools that you can use at your disposal. Maps, diagrams, UI layouts, visual concepts, mock-ups of the screen space. Again, useful for communicating ideas. One of the things that you will probably find is trying to communicate gameplay in written format can be a bit of a kerfuffle. We'll go with that word. It's just hard to communicate something that's so much more about interaction and kind of kinetic playing. But visuals can help carry that load, carry that burden. Here are some diagrams from Star Fox 2, which was never released. They have an outline of their map, they have some of the general UI layout, and they have an idea of how they use the screen space, what will be on screen, what kind of information will be communicated at any given time. Here we have a look at some of the map layouts. These were for specific indoor sections, which they didn't really use in the end. And we also have a quick idea of enemy formations, is I suppose the best term. And there is an accompanying page where each formation is given a brief rundown of what kind of behaviors they have. Again, this is all very useful depending on the type of game you have and can help communicate your ideas very quickly. especially within a team, this kind of thing. If you have this many enemies, if they're broken down very clearly and given specific behaviors, it's easy to build from. Obligatory Zelda reference for my lecture today. We have some of the outlined dungeon designs from the original Zelda translated into English. Again, this is imagery that communicates your concept. It is not art. So don't get too carried away with whatever you decide to draw up or mock up in Photoshop, Illustrator, whatever. Just remember it is intended to communicate the gameplay, the game experience, and what kind of game you are trying to achieve. I do not want to see 5 character concepts that don't really show us much of anything other than you can draw. Now, key points to cover. The most obvious is, how does the game play? Things to ground the reader, both us and whoever your teammates may eventually be, that you can use. Is it second person? Is it third person? Is it top down? Is it side scroller? Is it a puzzle board game? Easy things that can help us contextualize the idea that you're trying to make. Again, communication is the key. What can the player do? This is essentially your mechanics. What abilities will they have at any given time? What are the limits to those? If they can swing a sword and attack enemies, does that mean they can cut through walls? Probably not. Make that very clear. What should the player do? Again, this kind of comes back to, what are the limits? How is the player supposed to play? So as many mechanics as you may give them, there is always an intended way designers want the player to play. How are you going to ensure that that happens? What's an example of players not playing? I can't think of one right now, but we'll come back to it. How will the game react to player inputs? Again, this comes back to what we briefly talked about last week with systems. If a player jumps, how does the world respond? If there are enemies and a player moves close to them, what do the enemies do? Try and account for all the ways your mechanics interact with and engage with each other. What are the limitations? Again, we've talked about that. What are the rules? Where do you draw a fine or hard line on where your mechanics do and don't work? How does the game stop or impede the player? Again, how does the game react to the player's inputs? What are the general rules? Here are some additional recommended points to cover. Depending on your game, some of these are probably required. Premise, give us a quick context, quick setting. Are we on Earth? Are we in space? Are we in a castle? That kind of thing. If you have a narrative-driven game, or you want your game to be narrative-driven, feel free to give us a paragraph, I wouldn't say too much more, of a plot or a setting, enough to give context. We do not want unfinished novels. Atmosphere. Atmosphere is good. Sometimes a game may not have a plot, but in the case of something like Silent Hill, where it talked about the fear and the isolation, again, it comes back to what kind of experience do you want the player to have. Excuse me. And lastly, the visual design / aesthetics. Are you aiming for realism? Are you going for pixel art? Are you going for some sort of cel-shaded look? Are you drawing from specific art movements, impressionism? Are you drawing from film noir, that kind of thing? Some sort of precedent that gives us an idea of how you want your game to, for the most part, look. Now, to put it quite simply, your document should be legible, give both a general understanding of what your game is and a detailed explanation of its components. We've given the structure out before, and I'd like to make it very clear that the following is not a required structure, it is a recommendation. Just as a good way to maybe draft up your GDD, this is a good place to start. Give us a title, give us maybe a paragraph or two on the general premise. The mission statement, that's essentially the tagline that we talked about with Race and Chase, fast, fun, car racing, multiplayer game. What kind of genre do you think it aligns itself to? And who is your target audience? Why would they want to play this? Who are you aiming for? From there, and I cannot stress this enough, clearly illustrate what your mechanics are. Some students seem to put their mechanics at the end, which means we read a whole bunch of stuff, missing some of the key context. Get the mechanics out early, and then you can go from there. And you have a few things towards the bottom. A UI, if you think it's necessary. If it is a puzzle kind of game, or if you're doing a card game, a UI is definitely needed. If you're doing a turn-based RPG, which I hope no one is, you'll definitely need a UI layout. Schedule is optional, however, it will be required once we put you into your groups. I will release this recommended, or yeah, recommended, not required, recommended schedule to Blackboard once we finish class. Now, here are a couple of student points that we've noticed pretty much every year. Things to consider and some general feedback based on the work that we usually get. So, mechanics should be early. I've just said that. The mechanics give us the context for how we view pretty much the rest of your document. The sooner you get those in, the better. I think that's all that needs to be said. Paragraphs, people. Break your paragraphs up. If your game design document has 3 paragraphs, that's not enough. Break it down. Be concise. Bullet point it if you have to. If you're using paragraphs, make sure that each paragraph has a specific focus. But yes, break those things up. And bullet points. Be as concise as possible. The clearer it is in the shorter amount of time, the more efficient your development will be. Detail. Detail is essentially what always happens every year. You think you've gotten most of your document out and you overlook some pretty key points. We've already talked about puzzles, where a student will say, my game is going to be a puzzle game. Yes, Simon? Yes, we can. Cool. Okay. Where was I? Puzzles, right. So puzzles, like we said, is an example where a student will say, I'm going to do puzzles, and then fail to illustrate what a puzzle actually is in the context of their game. The same goes for combat. A lot of students will say, I'm going to have melee combat in my game, and then move on from that point. What does that actually mean? How does combat work? What kind of attacks does the player have? What kind of defense options? How are they going to read the enemies? Is there going to be telegraphing? All these sorts of things. Outline that. You may have it in your head, but whoever is, programming this for you is not psychic, like I've said before, so you need to outline these. And essentially the same point applies for all of these. Leveling up. A lot of students say, I'm going to have experience points and my character's going to level up. They fail to explain why, what the purpose is, and what they gain from it. Again, be very specific. Everything in the game needs to have a purpose of some kind. Lastly, context. For the most part, this doesn't happen as often, but it kind of comes down more to structure than anything, where the mechanics are left much later and certain parts of the game are explained much later in the GDD, meaning it's a baffling read up until the final part, which makes it a big surprise. Don't do that. Lay the groundwork early so that they understand the game, what are the mechanics, what can the player do, and then explain the level structure. Don't have level structure and core loop at the beginning without explaining the mechanics. The mechanics are what you build upon for the most part, and they make the document easier to read. Okay, here is the big one. Scope. Scope. Now, for the most part, we encourage everyone to draw from the games that they like and from the games that obviously inspired them to be here in the first place. But let's jump forward. This is not supposed to say 8 months. That's supposed to say 8 weeks. In the scope of this course, you have between 8 to 10 weeks, you will have a team of 4 to 6. For the most part, with a lot of the games that you tend to draw from, you will not be able to create some of your favorite mechanics, some of the ideas that you want to take from them. However, when that is the case, you focus on the experience. With the games that you enjoy, what feeling do you get out of it, and how can you recreate that with mechanics of your choosing? You don't need to mimic them beat for beat. For example, again, turn-based RPGs can be complex systems to build. But dig a bit deeper, find out why you like those games. What do you get out of them? Is it the adventure aspect? Is it the continual reward? And how can you use mechanics to create those same feelings? So, scope is a big one. Be very realistic. And the more you think about your ideas and get them down on paper, the more you will realize the amount of work that is required to go into them. And then from there, you can start finding out what mechanics work, what don't, and what mechanics can you use to recreate those experiences that you're trying to draw from. As I've been saying over and over again for the last 27 minutes, this document is not necessarily for yourself. It is for you, in that you need to get your ideas out on paper in a clear and legible format. But the real purpose of this is for others to be able to read it and build what you had in mind. We have had, I think we did an experiment a while ago, and it's something that we'll do a little bit today. We had students create sort of a one-pager, which is what we're going to cover shortly, which is a type of format that can communicate your idea very quickly. Give them to another student and see if they can essentially tell their concept back to them. There you find out pretty quickly how what you've written can be misinterpreted and how a completely different game can come out of what you think explains your idea. So the team has to build upon what you write and whatever is in your head. You need it to be as comprehensive as possible on paper, almost in its entirety. Otherwise, there is room for not misinterpretation, but reinterpretation. Misinterpretation means they get it wrong, but if you didn't write it correctly, it means there wasn't anything to get wrong in the first place. So, are there any GDD questions? I'm not thinking there would be too many. Nothing in the chat. I think now, before I kind of give you guys at least what I want you to do for today, moving forward, Simon, now's probably a good time. Let me just set up the screen so that we can see you.
Okay, I'll just drag my space draft up into here so you guys can then see it. And I'll grab that one in and put it up there. And I'll just sort out put that in there. And I'll just make sure my audio is reasonable for everyone, so they can hear it there. And then on Discord, seeing we're all over the place everywhere, I'll also make my audio available on Discord. Okay, so if you just pin me, it's probably the easiest way. Or view me. Yeah, that's great. That's great. Okay, so we were contacted a couple of weeks ago about a new tool that has been in development for a few years around the specific how do you communicate through a game design document. Now, this was a person working on films and also looking at how you communicate the transition of time, right? So talking about things is really difficult in that very linear fashion, particularly when you're talking about things that move or animated or in a new location or how they interact. So what this company did is they've developed a thing called Space Draft. They would like to sell it to us as a tool that we would use and collaborate in. At the moment, we're still evaluating it, but I thought I might as well show it to the class so that you can go in and evaluate it yourself and see if you like it. The free version, which is Get Started for Free up here, actually it doesn't have the collaboration features, but hopefully in the future it will have those collaboration features. So, well, if we buy it, it'll have collaboration features. So if you can get started free. In the Get Started for Free, you'll create an account and then you'll get to see this idea of creating a draft of what you're doing. If we go through here, there are 3 phases where you start, you set up the space that you're going to be just talking about and the time frame. And basically what this is a map of your environment or your scene, a timeline which allows you to draw simple animations and have a timeline of what's happening, and then a narrative story down the side above me here that will tell me what's going on. So let's just go with a gaming environment, and we go next. And then we can pick a background. So set your background, got it. So if we just pick a background that is sky and tiles, we'll just do some walking around on this, and then go next. And the time frame, time clock, a timer, steps. So we'll just do time clock, and or we can do custom, which is any time unit we prefer. But if we just do timer 20 minutes, then we go OK, and we go apply. Now the idea of this is that I can drag things from the pins and say, okay, I want this little soldier, and I'll drop him in here, and then I can create a path. So I can draw a path, and he can wander around, and that path will take up some of this timeline down here. So if I grab up the timeline, I can see that I've got a timeline of a certain length of time, and I can drag his animation to run from a certain time, and then when I press play, it will start animating that timeline and animating his movement. At the same time, I have the story aspect over here, and this is where you'd put in the narrative of what's going on during this particular time frame. And so you've got, you can add in text in here and say hello, but you can also set time codes, and so you can have things happen at certain time codes. You can edit that time code, and so things will pop up and play through at different times. So yeah, the idea is that we are able to manipulate. We can insert a tag of saying, you know, I've got one tag in here, the Pixel Soldier will be doing something at this stage, right? So Pixel Soldier says hello. So what we're doing here is we're creating the narrative that ties to a timeline. Now, at the moment, I'm doing this in an incredibly small version because I'm in my small window. But the idea here is that if I do that way, oh no, it's that way. Nope, it's that way. Yep, I can scroll that out. We're able to move around, and it's too small because of my window size. But if I step my timeline to a new location, I can then play through my description. So the thought here is that you're able to timeline through, and it will pop up and show you the story as well as showing you what's going on. Now there are examples of this, and I'll just grab one here that they use. They've got one where they're saying this is how to escape North Korea, and you can press play and it will step through the story that they're telling, and you can see here it's transition, and it's got people, though I'll need to make that smaller so you can see them. So you've got these, my zoom is too large. So you can see they've got these people moving around and interacting, and there's a story happening with images telling what's going on in the timeline of the session, right? So this is an idea of how you might tell a mapped time story with text components. Okay, so I thought if you want to try it, give us some feedback. Do you think if you try it and the designers like it, then this is the sort of tool we might buy for or investigate potentially in the future for sharing timed game design documents. Apparently Mad Max, the new filming of the new Mad Max movie, is using Spacedraft as their way of doing logistics around who's going to be where, what scenes they're going to need to film, what people are supposed to be in what locations, and how the teams move around on the set. So they're using it for logistics of planning the movie shots, but it was just as any way of describing a logistics or timed interactions with narrative. So this is a new tool. Give it a try if you're interested, and certainly give us feedback, because we certainly wouldn't want to start spending money on a tool that the students didn't find useful or interesting. Okay, so I just thought I'd share that. So we had a meeting last week, so they were keen on us doing something in that space. Okay, and if you've got any questions, just ask us, ask me, and I'll have a meeting with Tui.
Cool. Thanks, Simon. Okay, so today, where are we? Just for context, this is probably one of the few times where we will actually assign you something specific to do, especially at these early stages, because from once you're assigned teams, you will write your own schedules, and we'll be checking that you're keeping with those schedules. But as we briefly mentioned, there is the Scott Rogers dude who worked on Maximo as one of the lead designers there. He has a very kind of specific and methodical breakdown for how he goes about reaching GDDs. Starts with a one sheet, a 10-pager, makes beat charts, which are an interesting tool that we'll talk about once you're in teams, and a kind of a follow-on from what Simon was talking about. And then eventually assembles the GDD. The part we're going to focus on today is the one sheet. It's sort of an expanded tagline to some extent. So the one sheet is the game title, what console you intend to work on, your target age of players, so your demographic, what rating you want. This isn't too important to you now, but for those of you who do end up going on into the industry or who want to, knowing your rating is actually going to be very crucial, because it determines A, who you can and cannot market to, and how much budget someone is probably willing to give you. Brief summary of the game's story, focusing on gameplay, the distinct modes of gameplay, and the part that I want you to focus on today, the unique selling points. Competitive products, not that important, but probably a useful thing as far as using reference games. Nothing. Okay. So here is an example. This is some concept, Farm Wars. They go down through a big game summary and then an outline. We don't want you writing all of this. We just want you focusing on the unique selling points. We started talking about this a little last Wednesday, where we had some of the students in class basically try and tell us what is good about their game and why should someone play it. It's a lot harder to come up with an answer than you would think, so we want you to double down on this. What could a unique selling point sound like? It may be mechanical, it may not. In the case of this one-pager, what is the selling point? Well, it's a real-time strategy action meets farming simulation. You can build and breed unique farm weapons and crops, hundreds of combinations. You may not have hundreds of combinations of anything in your game with 8 weeks, but it'll sell the game. Over 50 weapons, from a simple hoe to the Deathbringer 3000. Fight hordes of enemies and bosses, yada yada yada. Essentially, in brief, concise sentences, why should someone play your game? What are the appealing factors? So, for the next 10-20 minutes, have a think about that. Try and jot those down and see if you can A, convince your peers of the quality of your game. We'll come around and see what you guys reached, and then from there, start to focus down on your GDD. For Wednesday, what we would like to see, and I'll release this in notices a little later, a good idea of the structure. Just bullet points, how you're going to go about it. We would ideally have your systems ready. The mechanics are mostly finalized. The interactive elements that you have are all pretty clearly outlined. How they interact with each other is there, and accounting how they interact. And then systems, again, moving on from last week and trying to account for how everything interacts with everything. Look at what is the object, what kind of attributes does it have, what does/can the thing do, what are the internal relationships, how does this impact other objects within the scene or other mechanics, whatever the case may be, and then the environment very quickly, where does this happen. From here, I'm going to head on to the online students and we'll talk to them there. Are there any questions? Okay. Um, we'll have a look. Chances are these ones aren't getting updated this trimester, so we'll see. Um, Probably not for right now. If you're just prototyping stuff, that's fine. Um, that's probably more of a discussion you'll have once you get into the team setting, see what version everyone's going to use.
Given that you can only download the 5.0.3 from Unreal now, everybody who's installing Unreal from this point on will get the 5.0.3 version. It appears from my initial testing that the 0.3 and the 0.2 are very minor and so will play nicely together. I think if you change, if 5.1 comes out, that would be a problem, right? So you certainly couldn't use a 5.1 or any of the 4s with a 5 project. But I believe the minor, the build version, right, rather than the major and minor. If either a major and minor, either 5 or the 0.0 changed, then that would be a problem. But the 0.2 to 0.3, I think, is fine.
Cool. Anything else? Nope. Very good. Billy will float around in studio, and then I'll be back with everyone shortly. Online students, stay put, and I will be jumping into Zoom and Discord, and we can have a quick chat. Get to work.
Okay, so just saying to people on my Twitch, so that was for the designers, and it's very useful to kind of understand their process and also understand the process of designing a game while we are learning to program. Because if you're working with the designers, you will need to work with those design documents. And as a programmer who's wanting to share your design ideas, even if you haven't learnt to be a designer, those will be important. So I'm going to keep recording here, and I will bring Tui off there, and we will talk about the Git and Unreal from now. So that's what I'm going to record. I'll put a chapter in the YouTube video, and hopefully there'll be appropriate links to that we can do in Panopto. Oh, pardon me. Okay, so so one of the things that we're looking at today is the Comp313 GitLab repo pages and how an example of how to start the project. So what we'll do is I'll jump into the assignment sheet, and if I grab that and go bang. Okay, so here we're looking at the assignments, and if we look at assignment 1, I've added the link for this to make it a bit easier, but I thought I'd work you through this. So the assignment 1 template is in the LMS, and the reason why I've added a link here is because this allows us to go to the learning management system. Now, if we have a look up here, we actually have Comp313, and you can see we have the lectures are in 2022, and I have an assignment 1 and a small top-down one that I was playing with. But the assignment 1 is the one that you can go into, and actually 3 of you already forked it. Well done. So 3 forks up there. Now, if you click on fork, what the way that we can do this the most easily for setting up your assignment and actually submitting assignment 1. So at the moment, you've probably hopefully just been playing with Unreal and just been creating a project and just starting to play with it. You actually will probably want to create a new project for what you actually decide to do with the small game you're going to create or the project you're going to create in
Hello, engineering students. Can everyone hear me?
I will just quieten Tui down. Okay, so that's Tui is on the Zoom. I shall jump off the Zoom. So, can I share my screen on Discord? Oh, sorry, that's exactly what I should be doing. Thank you for commenting. I need to find my Discord, and I will jump across to my. I'll jump back in. Yeah, so Tui's on the opposite. I'll stay in lectures and turn on camera and settings, video camera to make sure my video camera is correct. And which video is it using? OBS virtual camera, that should be correct. Test video, yep, that's me. So escape. Hopefully you're able to see me now in Discord. Can we chat in Discord and just check? Okay, I've got one chat there. Oop. Oh, there's many chats. So in the lecture chat area, just getting it. Yep. Okay. Good. So so what we've got, and I'll just go back because the students hadn't seen this. So so this is the if I go back far enough, assignment 1, and this GitLab repo, assignment 1 template. We can click on that. That takes us to here. I can go to fork. And the fork will take me to this page where it says project name assignment 1, and where you go which URL to fork it to. In here I have hundreds of them because I did this for Comp 261, but here's the Comp 313. You should only see one of these. The tutors have had their list destroyed by having all of these assignments added, but find your assignments and your username, and you can insert the repo into that, right? So if I pick, and actually my name hasn't been added to this, so I'll have to add my name so I can submit. But yeah, so you should be able to find your name in here, and then you should, once you've found it, you should be able to, and I'll just do it as if, oh, actually, I will. They didn't add me. Where do I add me? Well, I'll just, as you can see, I've got lots because I've done this a lot, including all the teams. So if I just put myself into the TLC best practice, right? So I could assign it there. You can set it to private because this is your private one, or internal, then any logged in user will see it. I stick with private. I don't think. Yeah, no, you don't need to make it internal. And so when I fork the project, that will create a copy of that assignment template in the accessible area for me, or in your case for you. And this will be under, for your case, it'll be under the Comp 313 assignments, and then this will be called assignment 1. Now this repo has an example, a text README, where you would add things like the title, a gameplay video, and the description of the main mechanics, and the what was difficult, what was interesting, and your reflections on learning. Now the original assignment I put into Markdown in this repo that you've then just copied, and so that should give you those links and the information you need for doing assignment 1. Now, the reason why we have a template is so that you can see that we've already added a .getIgnore and .get attributes. This is because we are using Git as our source management system. Now, when you're working with designers, they may well choose to use GitHub because that's their preferred environment. That's perfectly reasonable. If your group want to use GitHub, that's perfectly reasonable. If you want to use GitHub because you prefer its features, then that's fine too. You just have to add myself and Kun as viewers of that repo so that we can see your code, and so that we can go and have a look at it and look at the README in that GitHub. Now, you can also make that public if you wanted to, so you wouldn't have to add us as viewers, But if you don't, you'll have to add Kun and I. So my name's Simon McCallum on GitHub. I will get you Kun's username so you can add him. Now, I've also created an untracked and raw content folder. This is because in untracked is listed in the gitignore as a folder to ignore, and raw content is listed in is also listed as the in Git attributes keep in the Git LFS. Now we're currently working on where exactly we're going to put our Git LFS storage. I'm trying to negotiate how much space we can get for that. So we're still in flux on trying to make sure the Git LFS is working really well for large files, because some of the Megascan files are multiple gig large, and that's gonna blow our repo. So we don't use big content at the moment. You will cripple the Git lab, and we'll have to delete things from GitLab. So also make sure you always have a copy on your local machine. Now, once you have forked it, right? So once you've forked the repo, this has these git ignores and has a README and things in it. So what I can do is I can clone. Now, because I have both IntelliJ and Visual Studio Code installed, it's saying, hey, I've noticed that on your machine you have these two systems installed. So I'm quite happy to directly download into those. That's not what we're doing in this project. That's actually much more if you're using, we did this in Comp 261, we used Visual Studio Code. But these two have recognized that I've got those plugins installed. What we're going to use is we're going to use the clone to HTTPS, and we can copy that. And that will allow us to clone down onto the local machine. So, okay, now we get into the reminder of how Git works for you. So if you have installed Git, then you type git bash or git, and this will give me my git bash window. All right, so this is on my machine, which is AW1. So I can use standard commands like ls, and so where I put my stuff is in. So I'm going to cd into D drive, and then cd down to git /comp tab to give me the options, comp 313, and I've got 2022. You probably don't need to know that you're doing it in 2022. And I've got code, and I actually have assignment one of v1 already in there. I don't want to put it there. I'm going to go to this repo, this area. And now you can see here I've got an assignment 1 v1, which is the version I was playing with, and no others. And so what I'll do is at this point I can go git clone, and I'd hit copy. So and it's added in those two little bits. So you need to delete. And for some reason I touched the function key, and it told me I touched the function key. So this is the HTTP GitLab that I actually had just copied. So this is the repo. This was where I had copied my fork to. You should have a /coursework /comp313 /2022 /assignments, I think, in here, right? And then assignment 1 git. When you do that, it will clone down that repository. Now, how this is working is that we now have an upstream. We have a remote repository on the server, and I've cloned it down, so I've now got a complete copy of that remote repository locally on my machine. And if I do an ls, you can see that I now have an assignment -1, which is the one I've just cloned. So assignment -1. Now, if I'm going to, and you can see that that is also telling me that I'm in main, right? Now, GitLab has changed from master to main as its primary branch name. that you might find that if you create your own repo and start adding things, then that will be a problem. And so there's a mismatch between main and master. It gets quite confusing. So doing it this way, I'm now on the main branch. So if I do a get status, you can see that we're all okay. Come on, wake up. Why is it not giving me get status? Ah, there we go. Just took a while. So as you can see, there are no changes commit. So it's actually saying, oh, it's modified get content dot get keep. Now the the raw content get keep adds a file to a folder so that that folder is created. If you have an empty folder, then it will not create that folder, right? Because it says, well, if it's empty, why would I pull that down and clone it and stuff, right? So if you want to make sure you've still got some folder structure, you can put a get keep file in there. Now, what I now have is completely empty repo with the 2 readmes in it and the 2 folders. And if I do an ls minus, now I use like last r or lstar. Now the reason why I do a minus last r is that is a it's the A is for all, S is for sorting, T is for by time, R is in reversed order, and L is for a long format. So this gives me my long format in timed modified reversed order. So the most recently modified file is put at the bottom. I find this useful when doing a list, is because often when it scrolls off the top, I'm actually just interested in the stuff I've changed most recently. So that's why I do my listing is long, all things, including the dot files, sorted time reversed, right? So just as a tip. Okay, so what I now want to do is, if I wanted to put a project into here, an Unreal project, I can now go to Unreal and create a new project, and we can put it in and copy that project. So if I just take that, oh wait, yeah. So if we're in Unreal, and you can see I've got an update here. I won't press that update yet. But if we go to oh, okay. I will do the update, seeing it's getting keen for me to do that update. So we'll just do that update, and see how long it takes. It shouldn't be too long. You never know. So the idea here is that we will create a new game. Now I've actually got various games down here. You can see we've got the top down, and these were the 2 I was working on recently. The update took a while for you. So what we can do is that seems to be running the update. What I'll do is I'll use the existing files I have rather than build a new one. So just be reassured that if I go into my folder, that I have actually created, so these codes, so this was a top-down, this was the top-down template, which was so Amy, hopefully someone's saying, yes, you just use guest and guest. Yes, excellent, that's right. So, and I'll just check the chat. Yeah. So there is lecture chat and there's the actual chat. The reason I'd created lecture chat is because the Twitch didn't have the chat feature in its live streaming until just recently, so that's been a very new thing. Okay, so what we have up there is we have top down with C and top down SM. So top down SM I had created without the starter content, and the top down was with the starter content, but using the saying it was going to be a C++ project. The advantage of saying it's a C++ project is that it will already build the solution files for Visual Studio and create the initial Visual Studio, the C++ header files and source files. So it just makes that process a bit easier later. So what we can do is if I grab this small one, and you can see in here I have this content, and I have in content there is a small amount of content, but not the huge amount that you get in the full when you add all of the developed content. Now, is this, you can see here I already had my get attributes and my get ignore, and this is because I was playing with this earlier. What you would not normally have in a immediately would be those files. So what I do is if I can grab and I grab all of these files, which would be the ones that would be created when you create the project. So I'll just check that this is actually so actually, so this is probably a better example. So here you can see these are all the files that have been created. There is no .get repo in here because this has not been put into Get. This was me just creating a new file, and my update is, as you can see, going to take a while. So we will jump back in here. So this is saying that we have binary, like these are all of the files, including the .vs, that get created when you create a new project. So if you create a new project from that's a top-down, any kind of project, you'll get all of these files. You get these ones if you say it's going to be a C++ file. You don't get those if you say it's going to be Blueprint. But then if you try and add a C++ class, it will generate those. So what we can do is I can copy that lot. So you select all of those out of there, copy it, and we can put it into where we went into here, and I just downloaded assignment 1. I can put it in there, and you see all this content. I can then go paste, bang, and this will copy all of that content from that folder into this repository. Right, so this now means that I have a whole bunch of untracked files that I've now just added to this repository. All right, so these will be a large number of untracked files that just been added to this repository. I haven't committed those to repository. To do that, I need to go back to Git, and not that Git. I use Git bash on that one. So now if I do a git status, it will go, okay, there is a bunch of stuff that is untracked files. So here I can do git add. Sorry. Sorry, I should have done it. So this is going through and adding those. So now if I do git status, you'll see that it has added a whole bunch of files and a whole bunch of UAsset files and all of that content. The project's been added, and the UAssets are blueprints and also these mannequin files and materials and animation files and things, right? So this is the minimum for the top-down game. And now that I've added those, I can do my first commit. Now, interestingly, I haven't actually put any issues that I've got in my repo. So one of the things I'm actually going to do, just so you can see how this connects, is I'm going to go back to my assignment 1. This was the one that I forked into my area. And what I'm going to do is, you can see where I forked it from. I'm going to go up here and go into issues. and go into the list of issues. There should be none. And I'm going to new issue. And I'm going to create add initial top down. Okay, so and you know I can create that and just go create issue. One of the things this will do is it will create an issue that has this #1 in it here. So if I make this much larger, you can see that #1. That #1 is the number associated with this issue. So now when I go back to here and I go commit, so get commit, what I'm going to do is add a message. So you, if you're using command line, you have to add the message right here, and I'm going to add the message #1, right? Now I can actually add that. Oh, I can add it at the end as well. So let's see. I'll go adding template code. So that's adding the template code. I can go, and the #1, when I push this up to my remote repo, will actually connect this commit to that issue, which means when you've got like a whole bunch of things you want to do and you know that you're tying code to some problem you're trying to fix, this gives you a way of making those connections. And when you look in your Git repository, you can see why you updated code, not just that you updated code. So this is a kind of a nice way of combining those two. Now, I've got a son here who's coming to say, hello, William, I'm in my lecture. You need to go and do some painting potentially. Okay? Try and paint the blue and the purple today. Okay? Cool. I'll be finished at 1 o'clock. Okay? Right. So, yes, that's my son was just coming in to ask why he hasn't got computer time. And he's run out. And maybe he wants to go and make himself lunch. So, what we're going to do is when I do that commit, it will... Now, what this is doing is I put those files into the folder with Git, but I hadn't actually saved it to the repository. They just happened to be in the same folder. What I then did is I added those files to the repository to say, hey, Git, I'm about to add these files. So they all got staged and put into the potential for adding. Then I did a commit which forces those to actually be added to my local repository. So these are only currently local, they're not on the server. So you can see here, if I go into the assignment, I have all these files, they're all been updated a few days ago. This is not new, right? So these, even though I cloned these were the dates that they had been changed by me when I created this repo. So because what we've got now is a disconnect between what's on my local machine, on my local repository, and what's on the remote here. And if we did a get status, it will tell us that. So if I just go up to and hit get status, on branch, 1 commit, use get push to publish your local commits. Nothing to commit, the working tree is clean. So I've made no changes since I made that commit. And it's saying, hey, you still need to push because you're on branch main, your local branch is ahead of the one there. Right, so I can use get push here. Now, I can actually also use Visual Studio to do this, or even Unreal has Git built in, and once it can see that you've got the repo there, it knows, oh, I can use standard Git commands. Command line is honestly the cleanest way of doing this. I, however, also use something called source tree. If you're interested in a visualization of what's going on, rather than having to remember all of these instructions, source tree is pretty good. And also, as I said, Visual Studio. So I've got Visual Studio 2022. I'll just open that up. Alright, so I was just having to install Git LFS on my source tree because I've said, hey, I've added Git LFS. So I've downloaded Git onto my machine. I've also installed Git LFS on my machine so that it understands how Git long file storage works, right? LFS. So just so you can see, this is source tree. Currently it's looking at which one is it currently in? I can't see. As you see, I've got a lot of repos. It's down top down C. That's where it's looking. So what I can do is I will actually add a local repository because I've just copied this down. So I can browse for it and jump into. So this is the one I've just downloaded. It's a D drive and Git in comp 313 in 2022 and code assignment 1 select folder, and I can, so what this is doing is this is adding it to source tree, so I've got a visual representation. And as you can see here, I did Simon McCallum did a bunch of commits up to this point, and here it says the original, the head, is at this point. Yes. So as I said, I'm just downloading Git LFS into my source tree because we're looking at using Git LFS. And you can see up here it's saying, hey, there's something that hasn't been committed yet. Right? So that's why it's suggesting I push. And it's saying the main branch, and there's one commit to push. So I could either use command line, or I could push here, or as I've just got my Visual Studio, I shall open a local folder, and we can go to the same location and go git comp 313 2022 code and assignment 1 select folder, and in Visual Studio Code it's loading up that folder saying, okay, hey, I recognize that this has got some Git changes. You can see here 1 outgoing, 0 incoming changes. I have a Git command up here where you could have cloned a new repo from an external source. You see I've got a local repositories, I've got assignment 1 and top-down C that it knows about because I've done those. And you've got the pull and push commands and managing the branches, all these commands in Visual Studio Code. Oh no, the Visual Studio, this is the 22 Community Edition that I recommend. So here, so these are 3 different ways that you could all do those commit, but because we're computer science, we'll do git push from here. When I do that push, what is happening is it's taking the local repository and it's pushing it up to the remote repository, so that you can see that we're doing this all properly. Now, I know most of you are comfortable with Git, but I just thought I'd take through this process so you could see the way that I'm using Git and my recommendation for Git and some of the tools that I use. So at the moment, it is pushing that up. Oh, failed. See, the file size limit's 100 meg by 150 meg. Please come. Right. Okay, so as you can see, this was me. I had been able to push and pull this before, so it could be that I've got some Git LFS object issues going on here, which I will need to solve. Now, I haven't had those. I've actually had a repo up there and it came down and went up. So this is a new thing for me. I'm sorry. I will have to resolve this to make sure that we've got those. It appears that we have 2 files that are causing us the problem. So if I do get status, it's gonna what I could do is, having found out which of the 2 files are causing us the most problems, then we could actually remove those and manually copy them across. So this is one way that you do it by trying to avoid some of these Git conflicts, is that you just don't push very large files. I was hoping that the Git LFS had been set up properly so that it would work us around that issue. I will have to talk to the admins to try and get that sorted this week. But in the meantime, you're actually just working individually. So work individually on your own code. You don't have to push it again. You can just keep your repo on your local machine. It is a little bit of a risk because if you lose your local machine, you don't have that secondary backup. But once I get this large file size issue sorted, then you can do that. For most of the things that you're being assessed on, those large files aren't actually necessary. Those are mostly asset files that get very large. And so we could basically remove those or simplify them or get them down. One is 149 meg and one's 150 meg. So they're probably in the asset. Now I actually again so I know this is probably incredibly boring for you at this point, but I use tree size pre because I like to know the size of things that I have. So I'm going to select a directory. I'll go in and I'll go into the D drive and I will go and have a look at the Git repo that is comp313 and select folder. Okay, so it says I've got 8 gig in there and 8 gig in code. Each of these 2 is a gig large, and so it will be in content, and we're looking for a single file that is larger than that. So none of those. None of those. I should actually be able to find. I should have. Actually, if I push with Visual Studio with Source Tree, it will probably tell me which of the files that actually were too large. But I'm just looking here to see if I can find which file might be larger than it should be. So that's 400 meg, of which the characters make up 390, so that's almost all of it, and so it's almost all in the mannequins. I would have expected the one of those to be the issue. Okay, well what I'll do is I can't see it immediately from there, so I will jump back into Visual Studio Code, into Source Tree. I'll try and see what it does when I do push, and I'll push to main. Now what I'd expect to happen is it would have pushed because I've had this push before, but we're using the Git LFS attributes now, and so it's trying to use Git LFS. But this didn't give me any more information than I got from doing that push. So I don't have any more information about which of these files is the long one. Okay, well what I'll do is I will talk to our admins and work out what's going on with that Git LFS push. That said, this is still going to work locally on your machine. You're not collaborating. What I wanted to get this sorted by was for when we collaborate, and that's in the second half of the trimester. We need to make sure that this is all working and smooth, because you'll be sharing large files and we'll need the large file system for that. And also I was hoping that we would commit using Git, because what you might have noticed if you've gone and had a look at the assignment page, if I jump into 313, if we go and have a look here, we're using a new submission system. We're in the submission system. This is due on the 8th of August. And what we've got here is the select the Git repo to submit. When I click on that, it should say not found, because I haven't created one there. But this is why I suggested you should fork it into comp313 2022 assignments and your name. And then when you do that, you will get a list of all the repos that are in that area. And then you'll be able to select the repo that you want to submit for the assignment. And that repo will then be tagged with the submission, and you keep it on your GitLab on the course pages, or you submit a link to your GitHub repo if you're using GitHub. So it's up to you as to how you do that. But if I click here, it'll go not found. Let's see if I go up to there. I'll create a new subgroup, which is my name. Create group, and I'll call it Simon, because that's what it's expecting it to be. And go create group. Right, so now I can actually go back and when I'm in my, and so there's a couple of ways. So I moved this here, this is the new one. Where I had forked the other one was actually to my LFS, to not coursework, but to TLC / and best practices, I believe. And there's my assignment one. I could actually fork this one now, right? So when I had actually done the original, now in the namespace I will have the one I can do it to, which is called Simon. Seeing nope, not that one. Comp 313. There I am, Simon. Just added myself. Now, if you've been developing your project elsewhere and you want to put it into your submission folder, then you put it into this area, and it will come under this Com313 2023 courses. And then when I'm in my submit area, I can actually go, it should allow me to say, aha, it now found that there was a repository in that location, right? So I can click on the link there and it says, oh, these are all the repositories. If you have multiple repositories, multiple attempts that you're making, you can have other attempts, you can do other things in here, and they'll all appear in here as something to submit. Don't worry about doing the tags. I haven't added any tags to this project. If you add a tag, you can submit a tag. If you submit the project as it is, then it will insert a tag. Otherwise, it will go, oh, you want to tag a particular version of your software, so you can insert a tag. If you don't know how to insert a tag, if we go and have a look at the repo, we can go into here and say, I go into here, and I've got under repository tags. So you click on tags, and you can go new tag, and you could tag this with initial, if you spell correctly, and which branch it's on, and create the tag, and then that will appear as a tagged commit so that I can always go back to this commit. And if we ever look at the coursework, if we go look at submit area now and I reload that, it'll say, oh, okay, so there now are actually tags here. It's not giving me my tag. Don't worry about it. You submit. Don't submit until like at the end there, because then you know that you've got everything sorted. If we commit this, I'll just show you that it's been successfully added. Don't do this yet. This is what you do near the time. But if I have a look inside this project, it will have added, I think, tags. Yeah, there we go. That initial tag, and here this is engineering submission. It's telling me when I submitted the code and the tag that's associated and given a comment. Okay, so this is basically a receipt for submitting your code at that time. Okay, are there any questions about that? And I did eventually get Unreal to load, and if we have a look at recent projects and I go to open those, so browse, which is just down here, I can get into my get comp313 22 code and go assignment 1 code and go open. Okay, maybe I need to select the project and open it. So that should be opening my project. So are there any Twitch comments or Discord comments? I can see that there are people still hanging around listening to me on both platforms. I am recording this, so it will be going up for people to watch. To see how I downloaded this currently, and I will go back and we will work out how to do the LFS stuff, but it's now 1 o'clock. I should leave you. I've got a son who wants in. William, just wait, okay? I will be out shortly.
You said 1 o'clock.
I said 1 o'clock to my son. So I will leave okay, so so what we need to do is I'll leave you in Discord with Michael, who's our tutor, who's on the Discord area. I'll just check in that chat to see what someone said. Okay, so I will leave you with that. You can see that it's I'm getting my machine to just finally up the top down. So this was the project that I'd copied into the GitLab repo. If you connect to source control and go git, you can see here it knows that this is in the comp361 code assignment 1, and it's accepted settings, and it's successfully connected to my remote repository, and that gives me the option to submit content, and that will update the changes, right? So this is the Git area to do that. The other areas were, so that's just in this bottom corner, just where I am. Actually, maybe I'm holding that way. So those are various options for doing Git. Okay, well, I'm going to go and look after my son and make sure that he's okay. And if you have any questions, you can email me, and hopefully that was a bit clearer on some of the Git stuff. If we want longer tutorials on Git, then you can certainly ask me for those. I will also be releasing some examples of me playing with more stuff on Wednesday. We will go through a bit more of the Git and Unreal. Okay, so as you can see, my green screen breaks when my son comes in and decides to drop the cat in to try and force me to leave the room. So have a great Monday,
I
and
want them to see the kitty.
we'll have a great Monday, and I will see you on Wednesday.